Sarah Martinez had always been careful about following rules. At 22, she worked as a junior marketing coordinator at a small tech company in downtown Seattle. Her days were filled with coffee runs, social media posts, and client presentations. She lived in a modest apartment with her roommate Jenny, splitting rent and groceries like any other young professional trying to make it in the city. That Tuesday evening started like any other. Sarah finished work around 6 and decided to stop by the electronics store on Fifth Avenue. Her laptop had been acting up for weeks, freezing during important presentations and making strange clicking sounds. She needed a reliable computer for her job, and payday had finally arrived. The store was busy with evening shoppers. Sarah wandered through the aisles, comparing prices and specifications on various laptops. She picked up a sleek silver model, testing the keyboard and checking the screen quality. After 20 minutes of careful consideration, she decided on a mid-range laptop that fit her budget perfectly. At the checkout counter, Sarah pulled out her credit card and handed it to the cashier, a young man with tired eyes who looked like he wanted to be anywhere else. He swiped the card, frowned, and tried again. The machine beeped with an error sound. "Sorry, your card is being declined," he said, not looking up from the screen. Sarah felt her cheeks flush. "That's impossible. I just got paid yesterday and I checked my balance this morning. Can you try it again?" The cashier shrugged and ran the card through once more. Same result. By now, a line was forming behind Sarah, and she could feel other customers getting impatient. She fumbled through her purse for her backup card. "Let me try this one instead," she said, handing over her debit card. This time, the machine made an even louder beeping sound. The cashier's expression changed from bored to suspicious. He looked at Sarah more carefully, then at the cards in his hand. "Ma'am, I'm going to need to see some identification," he said, his voice suddenly formal. Sarah's heart started beating faster. "Of course," she said, pulling out her driver's license. "Is there a problem?" The cashier examined her ID closely, comparing the photo to her face multiple times. He then walked away from the counter without explanation, taking her cards and license with him. Sarah watched nervously as he spoke in hushed tones with an older woman who appeared to be the manager. The other customers in line began shifting uncomfortably. Some moved to different checkout lanes, while others stayed to watch the drama unfold. Sarah felt their eyes on her and she wished she could disappear into the floor. The manager approached the counter with a serious expression. She was a stern-looking woman in her 50s with graying hair pulled back tightly. "Miss Martinez, we're having some issues verifying your identity and payment methods," the manager said coldly. "These cards are showing unusual activity patterns." "Unusual activity patterns?" Sarah repeated, confusion evident in her voice. "I don't understand." "These are my cards. I use them every day." The manager's eyes narrowed. "We see a lot of fraud in this business, miss. Young people come in here all the time with stolen cards, thinking they can buy expensive electronics and walk away." Sarah felt like she had been slapped. "Are you accusing me of fraud?" "These are my cards. I can call my bank right now and verify everything." "That won't be necessary," the manager replied curtly. "We've already contacted security and they're reviewing your case. If everything checks out, you'll be free to go." The word security sent a chill down Sarah's spine. She looked around and noticed that other customers were now openly staring at her. Some were even taking pictures with their phones, probably thinking they were witnessing a crime in progress. "This is ridiculous," Sarah said, trying to keep her voice steady. "I just want to buy a laptop for work." "I'm not a criminal." The manager crossed her arms. "That's what they all say, dear. We'll let the authorities sort this out." As if summoned by her words, 2 security guards appeared at Sarah's side. They were both large men in uniform with serious expressions and radios crackling with static. "Miss, we're going to need you to come with us," one of them said in a tone that suggested it wasn't really a request. Sarah's mind raced. This couldn't be happening. She was just trying to buy a laptop. How had a simple purchase turned into an accusation of fraud? She thought about calling someone for help, but who could she call? Her roommate was probably at yoga class and her coworkers would already be home with their families. The security guards escorted her toward the back of the store, past curious onlookers and through a door marked "Employees Only." Sarah's hands were shaking as she tried to process what was happening. In the span of 30 minutes, she had gone from being a regular customer to being treated like a criminal. The small security office was cramped and windowless, with flickering fluorescent lights and the smell of stale coffee. One of the guards gestured for her to sit in a plastic chair. while the other began making phone calls. Sarah could hear him speaking to someone about suspected credit card fraud and detaining a suspect. The word suspect hit her like a physical blow. She had never been in trouble with the law, never even gotten a speeding ticket, yet here she was, sitting in a security office being treated like she had committed a crime. As the minutes ticked by, Sarah's anxiety grew. She wondered how long they would keep her there and whether she would need a lawyer. Most of all, she wondered how something so simple had gone so terribly wrong. The security office felt smaller with each passing minute. Sarah checked her phone repeatedly, watching the digital clock advance from 7:30 to 8 o'clock. The guards had taken her credit cards and identification, leaving her with nothing but her purse and growing anxiety. "How much longer is this going to take?" she asked the guard sitting across from her. He was a heavy-set man named Rodriguez, according to his name tag, and he had been filling out paperwork for the past 20 minutes. "Depends on when the police get here," he replied without looking up. "They're pretty busy tonight." "Police?" Sarah's voice cracked. "You called the police?" "Standard procedure for suspected fraud cases," Rodriguez said matter-of-factly. "They'll run your information through their system, check for outstanding warrants, that sort of thing." Sarah felt sick to her stomach. She had never imagined that buying a laptop could lead to a police investigation. Her parents had raised her to respect authority and follow the law, and now she was sitting in a security office waiting for officers to arrive. 20 minutes later, 2 Seattle police officers entered the cramped room. Officer Thompson was a tall, thin man with sharp features and calculating eyes. His partner, Officer Davis, was shorter and stockier with a bushy mustache and a notebook always ready in his hand. "Miss Martinez?" Officer Thompson said, looking at the paperwork Rodriguez handed him. "We understand there's been an issue with credit card fraud." "There's no fraud," Sarah said firmly. "These are my cards." "This is all a misunderstanding." Officer Davis opened his notebook and clicked his pen. "Can you explain why your cards were declined multiple times and showing unusual activity patterns?" "I have no idea," Sarah replied honestly. "I used my credit card just yesterday to buy groceries." Everything was fine then. The officers exchanged glances. Officer Thompson pulled up a chair and sat directly across from Sarah, studying her face intently. "Miss Martinez, we see this kind of thing all the time," he said in a condescending tone. "Young people get their hands on stolen credit cards, go to electronics stores, try to buy expensive items. When the cards don't work, they act innocent and claim it's all a mistake." Sarah felt her temper rising. "I'm not acting innocent." "I'm innocent. Those are my cards, and this is my money. Can you prove that?" Officer Davis asked, pen poised over his notebook. "Of course I can prove it," Sarah said. "Call my bank. Check my employment records. I work at Digital Solutions on Pine Street. My boss is Marcus Chen. You can verify everything." Officer Thompson leaned back in his chair. "We'll do that. But first we need to run your information through our database. Make sure you don't have any outstanding warrants or previous arrests for fraud." The next hour was a blur of questions, forms, and phone calls. The officers took her fingerprints for verification purposes, photographed her driver's license, and asked detailed questions about her employment, her living situation, and her financial history. Meanwhile, other customers continued shopping in the main store, completely unaware of the drama unfolding in the back office. Sarah could hear the distant sounds of normal life continuing while her own life seemed to be falling apart. "Where are your parents, Miss Martinez?" Officer Davis asked during a brief lull in the interrogation. "My mother lives in Portland," Sarah replied. "She's a nurse at OHSU Hospital. My father travels a lot for work." "What kind of work does your father do?" Officer Thompson inquired, making notes in his own notebook. Sarah hesitated. Her relationship with her father was complicated. He had always been absent during her childhood, missing school plays and birthday parties because of his demanding job. She rarely talked about him with others. "He works for the government," she said vaguely. "What kind of government work?" Officer Davis pressed. "Federal law enforcement," Sarah admitted reluctantly. "But we're not close. I only see him a few times a year." The officers seemed to perk up at this information. They exchanged another look, this one more meaningful than the previous ones. "Federal law enforcement," Officer Thompson repeated. "Can you be more specific?" Sarah shifted uncomfortably in her chair. She had learned early in life not to talk about her father's job. He had always been secretive about his work, and she had gotten used to giving vague answers when people asked. "He's with the FBI," she said quietly. The atmosphere in the room changed instantly. Both officers straightened in their chairs and Rodriguez stopped his paperwork to look up. "Your father is an FBI agent?" Officer Davis asked, his pen frozen over his notebook. "Yes," Sarah replied. "But like I said, we're not close. I doubt he even knows what city I live in right now." Officer Thompson stood up abruptly and walked to the corner of the room, pulling out his cell phone. He dialed a number and spoke in hushed tones, glancing back at Sarah occasionally. While he was on the phone, Officer Davis continued asking questions, but his tone had become noticeably more respectful. "What's your father's full name?" he asked. "Miguel Antonio Martinez," Sarah replied. "But I don't see how that's relevant to this situation." Officer Thompson finished his phone call and returned to the group, his expression unreadable. "We're going to need to verify this information," he said. "If your father really works for the FBI, there are certain protocols we need to follow." Sarah felt a mixture of hope and embarrassment. She had never wanted to use her father's position to get out of trouble, partly because they weren't close and partly because she believed in handling her own problems. But if it would help resolve this nightmare, she was willing to swallow her pride. Officer Thompson stepped outside the security office to make several phone calls, leaving Sarah with Officer Davis and the increasingly nervous security guard Rodriguez. The small room felt even more cramped as tension filled the air. "Is there a number where we can reach your father?" Officer Davis asked, his previous aggressive tone now replaced with cautious politeness. Sarah pulled out her phone and scrolled through her contacts. She hadn't spoken to her father in 3 months, not since a brief and awkward phone call on her birthday. Their relationship had been strained for years, ever since her parents' divorce when she was 15. "I have his personal cell phone," she said, "but he might not answer if he's working. He travels constantly." Officer Davis nodded and wrote down the number. "We'll try to reach him, but first we need to verify his employment with the Bureau." Through the small window in the office door, Sarah could see Officer Thompson pacing in the hallway, still on his phone. His conversation seemed intense, with lots of nodding and note-taking. Rodriguez cleared his throat nervously. "Maybe we should call the store manager back down here," he suggested. She should know about this development. 20 minutes later, the same stern manager who had accused Sarah of fraud returned to the security office. Her attitude had completely changed from hostile to worried. She kept glancing at Sarah and then at the officers as if trying to figure out how serious the situation had become. "Officers, is everything all right?" she asked. Corporate called asking about the incident. "They want a full report." Officer Thompson returned from his phone calls looking troubled. He whispered something to his partner, then turned to address everyone in the room. "We've made contact with FBI headquarters in Washington," he announced. "They're verifying the information about Miss Martinez's father." Sarah felt her stomach drop. The last thing she wanted was for her father's colleagues to know she was sitting in a security office, being questioned about credit card fraud. Despite their difficult relationship, she respected his career and didn't want to embarrass him. "Is this really necessary?" she asked. "Can't you just call my bank and verify that these are my cards? This whole thing is getting out of hand." The store manager shifted uncomfortably. "Maybe we acted too hastily," she said. "If there's been a misunderstanding." Officer Thompson held up his hand. "We need to follow proper procedures. If Miss Martinez's father is who she claims he is, there are security protocols that must be observed." Another 30 minutes passed in uncomfortable silence. Sarah tried calling her roommate Jenny but got no answer. She considered calling her mother in Portland but decided against it. Her mother would only worry, and there wasn't much she could do from 3 hours away. Finally, Officer Thompson's phone rang. He answered it immediately and stepped outside again. This conversation was longer than the previous ones, and Sarah could see him taking extensive notes through the window. When he returned, his entire demeanor had changed. He looked pale and slightly shaken. "Miss Martinez," he said carefully, "we've just spoken with FBI Assistant Director Patricia Wells. She confirms that Miguel Martinez is indeed employed by the Federal Bureau of Investigation." The room fell silent. Rodriguez stopped shuffling papers, the store manager's eyes widened, and Officer Davis put down his pen. "Furthermore," Officer Thompson continued, "we've been informed that Miguel Martinez is not just an agent. He's the Deputy Director of the FBI's Criminal Investigative Division. Sarah blinked in surprise. She knew her father held a high position within the bureau, but she had never understood exactly how high. He had always been secretive about the specifics of his job, citing security reasons. Assistant Director Wells is currently trying to locate your father, Officer Thompson continued. Apparently he's in a classified briefing, but they expect to reach him within the hour. The store manager looked like she wanted to disappear into the floor. "Oh my God," she whispered. "We accused the deputy director's daughter of credit card fraud." Officer Davis was frantically flipping through his notebook, probably trying to remember everything he had said and written about Sarah during the interrogation. "Ma'am," Officer Thompson said to Sarah, his voice now respectful and apologetic, "we're very sorry for any inconvenience this has caused. We're still trying to understand why your credit cards were declined." Sarah felt a mix of relief and frustration. She was glad that her identity had been verified, but she was also annoyed that it had taken her father's position to get people to treat her with basic respect. "Can I call my bank now?" she asked. "Maybe they can explain what happened with my cards." Officer Thompson nodded quickly. "Of course. Whatever you need." Sarah dialed her bank's customer service number and waited through the automated menu. When she finally reached a human representative, she explained the situation and provided her account information. "Oh, I see the problem," the bank representative said after a few minutes. "Your account was temporarily frozen due to unusual spending patterns. You made several large purchases yesterday that triggered our fraud protection system." Sarah remembered the purchases: a new winter coat, groceries for a dinner party she was hosting, and gas for a weekend trip to visit her college friend in Vancouver. All perfectly legitimate expenses, but apparently unusual enough to trigger the bank's security system. "The freeze should have been lifted this morning," the representative continued, "but there was a processing delay. I can remove the hold right now if you'd like to verify a few pieces of information." After confirming her social security number and recent transactions, Sarah's account was restored to normal status. The whole ordeal had been caused by an overzealous fraud protection system and a processing error. "Your cards should work normally now," the representative assured her. "We apologize for any inconvenience." Sarah hung up and looked around the room at the faces staring back at her. Everyone looked embarrassed and uncertain about what to do next. "It was a bank error," she announced. "My account was temporarily frozen by their fraud protection system. A simple mistake." The revelation that the entire incident had been caused by a simple bank error created an uncomfortable silence in the small security office. Everyone seemed to realize the gravity of what had just unfolded. A young woman had been detained, questioned, and treated like a criminal because of a computer glitch. Officer Thompson cleared his throat nervously. "Miss Martinez, we sincerely apologize for this misunderstanding. If you'd like to file a complaint about how you were treated." "I just want to go home," Sarah said quietly. She felt emotionally drained from the ordeal and embarrassed about the whole situation. The store manager wrung her hands anxiously. Of course. And please take the laptop you wanted, no charge. It's the least we can do after this terrible mistake." Sarah shook her head. "I don't want a free laptop. I just want my cards back so I can leave." Rodriguez quickly gathered her credit cards and identification from his desk and handed them to her with an apologetic smile. "Everything's here, miss. Again, we're really sorry about all this." As Sarah stood to leave, Officer Thompson's phone rang again. He glanced at the caller ID and his face went white. "It's FBI headquarters," he told his partner in a whisper that everyone could hear. He answered the call with a shaky voice. Officer Thompson speaking. The conversation was brief, mostly consisting of Thompson saying "yes, sir" and "I understand, sir" repeatedly. When he hung up, he looked even more pale than before. "Miss Martinez," he said carefully, "your father is on his way here." Sarah felt her heart sink. This was exactly what she had hoped to avoid. "What? Why?" "I told you we're not close. There's no need for him to come here." Apparently, when the FBI couldn't reach him initially, they had to interrupt a high-level national security briefing, Officer Thompson explained. When they finally told him what happened, he immediately left Washington on a bureau jet. The store manager looked like she might faint. "The FBI deputy director is flying here. Tonight?" Officer Davis was frantically writing in his notebook again. "What do we do? Do we stay here and wait for him?" Before anyone could answer, Sarah's phone rang. The caller ID showed Dad Mobile, a number she rarely saw on her screen. She hesitated for a moment before answering. "Hello? Sarah. Her father's voice was calm but serious the way it sounded during their rare phone conversations. Are you all right? I'm fine, Dad. This is all just a big misunderstanding. You don't need to come here. I'm already in the air, he replied. We'll be landing at Boeing Field in about 2 hours. Are the officers still with you? Sarah looked around the room at the nervous faces staring at her. Yes, they're here. Put one of them on the phone. With reluctance, Sarah handed her phone to Officer Thompson. He wants to talk to you. Thompson took the phone with trembling hands. This is Officer Thompson, sir. Sarah could hear her father's voice through the phone, though she couldn't make out the words. Thompson's responses were a series of yes, sir, and no excuse, sir, and it won't happen again, sir. After a few minutes, Thompson handed the phone back to Sarah. I'll see you soon, her father said before hanging up. The next 2 hours passed in an awkward blur. The store manager offered to close the electronics department early and escort everyone to the main office upstairs. She also insisted on providing coffee and sandwiches, though nobody had much appetite. Sarah tried to convince the officers to leave, arguing that there was no need for them to stay and face her father's arrival. But Thompson insisted they had a duty to see the situation through to its conclusion. Besides, he added nervously, leaving now would probably make things worse. As the evening wore on, word of the incident began to spread through the store's corporate hierarchy. Sarah received an apologetic phone call from a regional manager, followed by another from someone who claimed to be the district supervisor. Each caller was more apologetic than the last, clearly aware that they might be dealing with a public relations nightmare. At 10:30 p.m., Rodriguez received a call on his radio. There are 3 black SUVs pulling into the parking lot, a voice crackled through the speaker. Everyone in the room tensed up. Through the office window, Sarah could see employees and late-night shoppers pointing toward the front of the store. 5 minutes later, the office door opened and Sarah saw her father for the first time in over a year. Miguel Martinez was a tall, imposing man in his mid-50s with graying hair and sharp eyes that seemed to take in everything at once. He wore a dark suit and carried himself with the quiet confidence of someone accustomed to authority. Behind him stood 2 other men in similar suits, both wearing the kind of earpieces that made their profession obvious. Sarah, her father said, his voice softer now. He crossed the room and pulled her into an unexpected hug. Despite their complicated relationship, Sarah felt a wave of relief at his presence. I'm okay, Dad, she whispered. Really? Miguel Martinez released his daughter and turned to survey the room. His gaze moved from the nervous store manager to the 2 police officers, who had both stood at attention when he entered. The temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees. Gentlemen, he said in a calm, measured tone that somehow conveyed more authority than any amount of shouting could have. I understand there's been a misunderstanding involving my daughter. Officer Thompson stepped forward. His earlier confidence completely evaporated. Sir, we followed standard procedures for suspected credit card fraud. We had no way of knowing who she was. Miguel nodded slowly. I see. And when she told you her father worked for the FBI, what was your response? The question hung in the air like a sword. Thompson glanced at his partner, but Davis was studying his notebook as if it contained the secrets of the universe. We thought she might be lying, sir, Thompson admitted. We see a lot of people who make false claims to avoid charges. So you decided to detain her for 3 hours while you verified her story, Miguel continued, during which time she was treated as a suspected criminal. The silence in the room was deafening. Miguel Martinez stood with his hands clasped behind his back, his penetrating gaze moving from one person to another. The 2 FBI agents who had accompanied him positioned themselves near the door, their presence serving as a quiet reminder of the federal implications of the situation. Officer Thompson shifted nervously from foot to foot. Sir, we were just doing our jobs. When someone's credit cards are declined multiple times, we have to investigate. And did you investigate? Miguel asked calmly. Did you call her bank to verify the problem? Did you check her employment? Did you do any actual police work before treating my daughter like a criminal? The question cut through the air like a blade. Thompson and Davis exchanged uncomfortable glances, both realizing they had skipped several basic investigative steps in their rush to judgment. We were planning to make those calls, Davis stammered, but the store insisted we detain her first. The store manager stepped forward, her face pale. Mr. Martinez, I take full responsibility for this incident. My staff overreacted to a simple technical issue. We should have been more thorough before involving law enforcement. Miguel turned his attention to her, his expression unreadable. What's your name? Barbara Chen, she replied, her voice barely above a whisper. I'm the evening manager here. Ms. Chen, in your experience, do credit card criminals typically provide their real identification when making fraudulent purchases? Do they usually stick around to answer questions when their stolen cards are declined? The manager's shoulders sagged as she realized the obvious flaws in her logic. No, sir. They usually run. That's correct, Miguel continued. Real criminals flee when caught. Innocent people stay and try to resolve the problem, which is exactly what my daughter did. Sarah watched this exchange with mixed feelings. Part of her was grateful for her father's intervention and his methodical dismantling of the flawed reasoning that had led to her detention, but another part of her felt uncomfortable with the way everyone in the room was cowering before him. Dad, she said quietly, maybe we should just go home. I think everyone understands it was a mistake. Miguel looked at his daughter with an expression she had rarely seen during her childhood, something that might have been pride mixed with concern. Sarah, you were denied your basic rights tonight, he said gently. You were detained without cause, questioned without representation, and treated as guilty until proven innocent. That's not how our justice system is supposed to work. One of the FBI agents near the door stepped forward and whispered something in Miguel's ear. He nodded and checked his watch. I have a conference call with the Attorney General in 20 minutes, he announced to the room. But before I go, I want to make sure everyone understands what happened here tonight. He walked to the small whiteboard mounted on the office wall and picked up a marker. This is how police work should function, he said, drawing a simple flowchart. Suspicious activity is reported. Officers arrive and assess the situation. They gather evidence through proper investigative channels. Only then do they detain suspects if evidence supports reasonable suspicion. He turned back to face Thompson and Davis. Now, what actually happened tonight? The two officers looked at each other, neither wanting to answer. Tonight, Miguel continued when they remained silent. You reversed that process. You detained first, investigated later. You assumed guilt and forced the suspect to prove innocence. Thompson found his voice. Sir, with all due respect, we deal with credit card fraud every day. We've developed instincts about these situations. Instincts, Miguel repeated, writing the word on the whiteboard. Officer Thompson, do your instincts work equally well across all demographic groups? Do they react the same way to a well-dressed middle-aged white man as they do to a young Hispanic woman? The question struck at the heart of something everyone in the room had been thinking, but no one had dared to voice. Sarah realized that her ethnicity and age had probably influenced how quickly she had been labeled as suspicious. We don't profile people based on race or age, Davis protested weakly. Miguel raised an eyebrow. Then why didn't you call the bank first? Why didn't you verify her employment? Why did you immediately assume she was lying when she told you about her father's occupation? The questions hung in the air, each one highlighting another failure in the officer's approach to the situation. Ms. Chen, the store manager, spoke up. Mr. Martinez, what can we do to make this right? How can we prevent this from happening again? Miguel turned to look at his daughter. That's up to Sarah. She's the one who was wronged here. All eyes turned to Sarah, who suddenly found herself in the uncomfortable position of deciding how to handle the situation. She had never asked for special treatment because of her father's position, and she didn't want to start now. I don't want anyone to lose their jobs, she said finally. I just want assurance that this won't happen to someone else. Miguel nodded approvingly. That's generous of you, Sarah. But generosity doesn't solve systemic problems. He turned back to the officers and store manager. Here's what's going to happen. The Seattle Police Department will review its procedures for handling suspected credit card fraud. They'll implement mandatory training on proper investigative protocols before detention. Thompson started to protest, but Miguel held up a hand. Furthermore, this store will revise its policies for handling payment issues. Employees will be trained to work with customers to resolve problems rather than immediately assuming criminal intent. He paused and looked around the room. These aren't punishments. They're improvements that will benefit everyone, law enforcement, businesses, and citizens. Miguel's phone buzzed, indicating his conference call was about to begin. I need to take this call, he said.
Sarah, are you ready to go home?
Sarah nodded, gathering her purse and jacket. As they prepared to leave, she turned to address the room one final time. I hope you all understand that I never wanted this to become such a big deal, she said. I just wanted to buy a laptop and go home. What happened tonight could happen to anyone, and that's what we should all remember. As they walked toward the door, Miguel placed his hand on his daughter's shoulder. I'm proud of how you handled yourself tonight, he said quietly. You showed grace under pressure. It was perhaps the first compliment he had given her in years, and Sarah felt tears forming in her eyes. The black SUVs sat in the parking lot like silent sentinels as Sarah and her father walked through the nearly empty electronics store. Curious employees and late-night shoppers watched from a respectful distance, clearly aware that something significant had just occurred. Outside in the cool Seattle evening, Miguel paused beside one of the vehicles. The driver was already holding the door open, but Miguel made no move to get in. Sarah, he said, I know we haven't talked much lately. I know I haven't been the father you deserved. Sarah looked up at him, surprised by this unexpected moment of vulnerability. In all her memories of their relationship, he had never been one to discuss feelings or admit mistakes. Dad, you don't have to. Yes, I do, he interrupted gently. What happened tonight made me realize something. I've spent so many years focused on protecting strangers, on serving my country, that I forgot about protecting and serving my own daughter. The words hung between them in the crisp night air. Sarah felt years of resentment and disappointment beginning to shift, not disappearing entirely but softening around the edges. I watched you in that room tonight, Miguel continued. You handled yourself with dignity and strength even when you were being treated unfairly. You stood up for yourself without losing your composure. That took character, and I'm proud of the woman you've become. Sarah felt tears threatening again. I was scared, Dad. I didn't know what was going to happen. Being scared doesn't make you weak, mija, he said, using the Spanish endearment he hadn't used since she was a child. It makes your courage more impressive. One of the FBI agents approached discreetly. Sir, headquarters is calling about the conference with the Attorney General. Miguel nodded but didn't move away from his daughter. Sarah, I want to make you a promise. I can't change the past, and I know my job will always make our relationship complicated, but I want to try to be more present in your life. I'd like that, Sarah said softly. Good. He reached into his jacket and pulled out his business card, writing something on the back. This is my direct line. It bypasses all the bureau switchboards and goes straight to my phone, 24 hours a day. If you ever need anything at all, you call that number. Sarah took the card and looked at the handwritten number. Dad, what you did in there tonight, was that necessary? I mean, those people looked terrified. Miguel considered the question seriously. Sarah, what happened to you tonight happens to thousands of people every day. Most of them don't have a father who can fly across the country to defend them. Most of them just have to accept being treated unfairly and hope it doesn't happen again. He gestured toward the store behind them. Those officers and that manager learned something important tonight. They learned that their assumptions and shortcuts have real consequences for real people. Maybe next time they encounter someone in your situation, they'll remember this night and handle things differently. Sarah nodded, beginning to understand her father's perspective. So it wasn't just about defending me. It was about defending everyone who might face this in the future. Exactly, Miguel said. Sometimes you have to make people uncomfortable to create meaningful change. But I also want you to know that even if you worked at a gas station instead of a tech company, even if I was a plumber instead of an FBI deputy director, you would still deserve to be treated with respect and dignity. The agent cleared his throat again, more urgently this time. Miguel glanced at his watch and sighed. I have to take this call, he said. It's about a case that affects national security. But Sarah, I meant what I said about staying in touch. Don't be a stranger. He pulled her into another hug, this one longer than the first. I love you, mija. I should have told you that more often over the years. I love you too. Dad? Sarah whispered, as Miguel got into the SUV. Sarah heard him already beginning his conference call with the Attorney General, his voice shifting back into the authoritative tone she remembered from her childhood. But now she understood that tone differently. It wasn't coldness or distance. It was the weight of responsibility. The SUVs pulled away, leaving Sarah alone in the parking lot with her thoughts. She pulled out her phone and called her roommate Jenny, who answered on the first ring. Sarah, where have you been? I've been worried sick. Sarah looked back at the electronics store, where she could see employees gathered near the windows probably discussing what they had just witnessed. "It's a long story," she said. "I'll tell you when I get home. But Jenny? I think I understand my father a little better now." 3 weeks later, Sarah received a package at her apartment. Inside was the laptop she had tried to buy that night, along with a handwritten note from the store manager apologizing again for the incident. The note mentioned that all employees had completed sensitivity training and that new protocols were in place for handling payment issues. There was also a smaller envelope with her name written in her father's handwriting. Inside was a photo of them from that night in the parking lot, taken by one of the FBI agents. They were hugging, and for the first time in years, both of them looked genuinely happy. On the back of the photo, her father had written, "Sometimes the most important cases are the ones that happen in our own families. Thank you for reminding me what really matters. Love, Dad." Sarah smiled and placed the photo on her desk next to her new laptop. She had learned something important that night, too. Justice wasn't just about laws and procedures. It was about treating every person with dignity and respect, regardless of who their father was or what job they held. She picked up her phone and dialed the direct number her father had given her. When he answered, she could hear voices and activity in the background. He was clearly in the middle of another important meeting. "Dad, it's Sarah. Do you have a minute to talk?" "For you, mija," he said, and she could hear him stepping away from the meeting. "I always have time." It was a small moment, but it felt like the beginning of something new between them. Sometimes, Sarah reflected, it takes a crisis to remind people what truly matters. And sometimes being treated like a suspect can help you discover that you're actually someone's priority. The laptop worked perfectly, and Sarah never had another problem with her credit cards. But more importantly, she had something she had been missing for years: a real relationship with her father. And that was worth more than any computer she could have bought.